There is a specific kind of silence that only exists in the Norwegian wilderness during the transition from autumn to winter. The locals call it the hollow time, when the air is too thin to carry sound and the earth begins to harden like bone. It was during this time, in the late 19th century, that the story of the Skogli farm began to circulate, not as a ghost story, but as a warning. To understand the horror of the Myling, you have to understand the desperation of the era. In the remote mountain valleys, social reputation was the only currency that mattered. For a young woman named Inga, a servant at the Skogli estate, that reputation was her life. When she found herself pregnant and alone, she didn't see a miracle, she saw a gallows. The night she gave birth was the coldest on record. While the rest of the household slept, Inga retreated to the shadows of the Great Hall, a room used only for celebrations. There, amidst the smell of dried pine and old wax, she committed an act that would tether her soul to the earth forever. Terrified of the legal and social death sentence that awaited an unwed mother, she smothered the infant before its first true cry could alert the house. She didn't bury the child in the forest, the ground was already frozen solid, impenetrable as iron. Instead, she pried up a single, loose oak plank near the hearth of the great hall. She laid the small bundle, wrapped in a scrap of gray wool, into the dark, dry dirt of the crawlspace. She hammered the nail back in, covered the spot with a heavy rug, and spent the next 7 years pretending her heart hadn't died in that darkness. 7 years later, Inga was no longer a desperate servant. She was a bride. She had caught the eye of Lucas, a prosperous man from a neighboring valley. He was kind, hardworking, and, most importantly, completely unaware of the secret buried beneath the floorboards of her past. The wedding was to be the largest the valley had seen in a generation. Because the Skogli farm had the largest great hall, the celebration was held in the very room where Inga had committed her crime. As the wedding day approached, Inga felt a strange sensation. It wasn't guilt, not yet, it was a physical feeling of pressure. Every time she walked across the great hall, the floorboards seemed to groan under her weight, even though she was a slight woman. She avoided the hearth, but the heat of the fire seemed to draw her toward that one specific plank. The celebration began at sundown. The hall was packed with nearly 100 guests. Great trestle tables groaned under the weight of salted meats, flatbread, and jugs of potent ale. The air was thick with the scent of wet wool and wood smoke. In the corner, a local fiddler began to play a howling, a traditional dance meant to test the strength and agility of the dancers. Lucas took Inga's hand for the first dance. For a few minutes, everything was perfect. The music was bright, the laughter was loud, and the secret felt miles away. But as the clock struck midnight, the transition into the Sabbath, the atmosphere in the room curdled. The fiddler hand slipped, a sharp, discordant screech tore through the music. He tried to correct the rhythm, but his fingers seemed to move against his will, dragging the melody into a slow, minor key. The guests stopped dancing, one by one, as a rhythmic thumping began to vibrate through the soles of their boots. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't coming from the dancers, it was coming from beneath the floor. The sound moved. It started near the door and traveled across the room, straight toward the hearth. The heavy rug Inga had placed years ago began to bunch up as if something were pushing it from underneath. Then, with a sound like a gunshot, the oak plank splintered. A small, pale hand reached through the gap, it didn't look like a child's hand. The skin was gray and translucent, stretched so tight over the knuckles that the bone threatened to tear through. The fingers were impossibly long, ending in jagged, dirt-caked nails. The figure that crawled out of the darkness was a Myling in its most horrific form. It was the size of a 5-year-old boy, but its proportions were all wrong. Its head was too large for its spindly neck, and its eyes were wide, lidless, and filled with the black, oily void of the grave. It wore the same scrap of gray wool Inga had wrapped it in, now tattered and stained with the earth of the crawlspace. The room went cold. Not the cold of a winter breeze, but the cold of a meat locker. The breath of the guests hung in the air like ghost mist. The boy didn't look at the food, the ale, or the terrified faces of the neighbors. He looked only at Inga. He began to sing. It wasn't a child's voice. It was a wet, rattling sound, like air escaping a punctured lung. Mother, mother, so fair and bright, you gave me darkness, you gave me night, you gave me no name, you gave me no bread, so give me this dance before you are dead. Lucas tried to step between them, but the boy didn't even move his head. With a flick of his pale hand, he sent Lucas flying across the room, hitting the stone hearth with a sickening thud. The boy walked toward Inga. Every step he took left a wet, muddy print on the clean floorboards. He reached out and clamped his cold fingers around Inga's wrists. The moment he touched her, her scream died in her throat. The guests watched, paralyzed by a supernatural weight that seemed to pin them to their chairs. The fiddler began to play again. He wasn't in control of his bow. His arms moved in frantic, violent jerks, producing a music that sounded like a scream set to a beat. The Myling began to dance. At first, it was a slow rotation. The boy was light, almost weightless. But as the music picked up speed, the physiological horror began. With every rotation, the Myling grew heavier. Inga's arms were pulled downward, her shoulders beginning to slump under the increasing mass. Please, she managed to gasp, I'll give you a name, I'll call you John, I'll call you Peter. The boy's grin widened, revealing rows of small, needle-like teeth. Too late for names, mother, now, we dance for the debt. They moved faster. The boy was no longer walking, he was dragging Inga in a frantic, blurred circle. Her bridal veil flew off, her hair came undone, and her face turned a terrifying shade of purple. The weight of the child was now so immense that the floorboards beneath them began to crack and splinter with every step. The guests saw Inga's body begin to fail, her knees buckled, her ankles twisted at impossible angles, but the Myling wouldn't let her fall. He held her upright, his iron grip keeping her trapped in the dance. The sound of her joints popping was hidden by the screeching fiddle. After 10 minutes of the relentless, high-speed spinning, the Myling stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was louder than the music. Inga stood for a second, her eyes rolled back in her head, her body swaying, and then, she collapsed. She didn't fall like a person, she fell like a sack of stones. Her heart, pushed beyond its limit by terror and physical exhaustion, had simply stopped. The Myling stood over her. He looked down at his mother, his expression changing from rage to a deep, hollow sadness. He reached out and touched her cold cheek with one finger. Thanks for the dance, he whispered, and turned toward the hole in the floor. As the guests watched, he seemed to shrink, his body becoming smaller and more fluid until he was nothing more than a bundle of gray wool again. He slid back into the darkness beneath the hearth. When the authorities arrived the next morning, they found a room that looked like a war zone. The floor was destroyed, the guests were in a state of catatonic shock, and Inga lay dead in the center of the hall. They pried up the floorboards near the hearth, and there, they found exactly what the legend predicted, the skeletal remains of an infant, buried 7 years prior. The local priest refused to bury Inga in consecrated ground, and the Skogli farm was abandoned shortly after. Today, hikers in that part of Norway are warned about staying in old, abandoned farmhouses. They say that if you're there on a night when the wind dies down and the hollow time begins, you might hear a rhythmic thumping from beneath the floor. It's not a ghost looking for a scare, it's a child looking for a name, and if you can't give him one, he'll ask you for a dance instead. And as Inga learned, the Myling never gets tired, and he never, ever lets go.